Hey, welcome back to Sober Now. I'm Jim LaPierre. Today we're going to be talking about healthy partnerships in recovery. Initially, I labeled this healthy relationships in recovery, but I remember typically in the context of addiction recovery, when we're talking about relationships, we're usually only referring to healthy partnerships. So that is what I'm going to be talking about today. And actually would love to expand this to talk about different types of relationships as well. Parenting, friendships, relating to your family of origin, all of that. But for today, we're going to focus on just healthy partnerships. And as always, really welcome your questions and comments and insights. What's worked well for you, what hasn't. I want to offer a few just general tips, things that call them hacks, things that have worked really well for me, and things that folks don't seem to be aware of. So I've been happily married for 32 years. I'm very proud to say that I married my best friend, and that is one of the first pieces of advice that I give to folks is ideally your choice of partner is someone that you've established a very strong friendship with, you place no one above that person, and you continue to grow in that friendship. That to me is one of the biggest keys to partnering. The second piece of advice that I have for folks is stop trying to change each other. My wife and I have a running joke that you knew this when you married me. I think in most partnerships, especially in the first year that we're together, we often don't even realize how much we're trying to get our partner to change, and we don't overtly ask for those changes. We test each other, we poke at each other's insecurities, we play a lot of games with each other in codependency, and so ideally, whatever it is that we want or need, we're asking for that very directly. If we need something to change, then we're indicating what that is, and in my experience, that's pretty rare. So a lot of relational growth happens when we stop trying to change each other and accept each other more fully as we are. Make sure that you take some time and examine your family of origin. It's something that I think most of us don't realize is that the bulk of what we learn about how relationships should be, how people are to interact and relate to each other, most of what we learn about parenting and partnering, we learn in our family of origin. So if you're one of those people who grew up in a really healthy, well-adjusted family, then that's great. You're good to go. But chances are, if you're anything like me, what you learned was more or less the opposite of how it's supposed to be. And so quite often, I think the first 10, 12 years of my marriage, whenever I didn't know what to do, I would think, well, what would my parents do? And then I would do the opposite of that. That sometimes works well, sometimes it works horribly. But what I learned over and over and over again was that the only way to be the opposite of an extreme is to go to the other extreme. And so obviously that's not healthy. I think it's well worth examining what do I bring to a partnership. And the last piece of general advice that I give is whenever people ask me why do partnerships so often break up or why do people so often divorce, the answer I give is two people who don't really like themselves try to love each other. So how we relate to ourselves, for me, I'll just share what's worked for me. How I relate to myself and how I relate to my higher power are the foundation upon which all other relationships are built. I've had a lot of experience being my own worst enemy and not recognizing or really identifying the ways in which that undermined other relationships in my life. I've certainly gone through times where I distanced myself from my higher power, and in retrospect, it's easy to see that nothing worked. So those two relationships are absolutely foundational and absolutely critical to my success in all of my undertakings. What I'm going to share with you next is a little bit of a take on Maslow's hierarchy. If you don't happen to be familiar with it, you can Google it. It'll come right up. Maslow was a very clever guy who organized basic human needs, starting with survival and then working up through a hierarchy of transitioning from survival to living to quality of life. And my experience is two of the hardest questions that I ask people as a therapist: what do you want and what do you need? If what they need is something material, something that money can buy, something that is vital to survival, typically people can readily tell me what that is. If what they need is something that is more along the lines of an emotional need or more along the lines of support, typically they have a really hard time identifying what that is. And I think there's a very simple reason for that. We tend to have far greater awareness of the needs, wants, and feelings of others than we do ourselves. So what counselors usually refer to as mindfulness, I refer to as, hey, you got to pay attention to you. Being avoidant compromises how well you can function in any relationship. So if I apply the idea of a hierarchy to relationships, then to me, again, the foundation is how I relate to myself, how I relate to my higher power. And then comparing it to Maslow said, well, we need food to eat and water to drink and shelter and air and all those kind of things in order to survive. So if I was going to draw a parallel to that in terms of the most basic aspects of a relationship, of a partnership, safety is the most basic need. And safety to me means that there is an absence of any form of abuse. Some of those are very subtle. Emotional abuse, gaslighting, relating to a person who's narcissistic. We tend to gravitate towards the familiar. So if you grow up relating to very sick and selfish people, you may find that you tend to seek them out as partners. We are people that gravitate towards what's familiar and what's comfortable, and what it's really about is relating in a way where we feel like we know what we're doing or we're reasonably comfortable. And that's one of the pieces that I give general pieces of advice to people in recovery. When we talk about restarting or establishing a new partnership, the general piece of advice that I'll give is that if you meet somebody and you immediately feel comfortable, run. If you meet somebody and you're uncomfortable and you're not sure why, and you're just a little bit self-conscious and you're not really even sure what to do with your hands, stick around. Typically, if somebody's very comfortable to you immediately, it's because there's some familiarity there. If somebody is uncomfortable, it might just be because they're a good person. And what a good person or a healthy person wants you to do is to simply be yourself, which in order to do that, you have to know who that is. So having a strong sense of identity is a very vital part of any healthy relationship. The most intense relationships that I've seen are a product of trauma bonds. They most commonly are romantic partnerships that begin in rehabs, begin in homeless shelters, psychiatric hospitals, sometimes early recovery and 12-step fellowships. And I understand those. They're typically born out of desperation. We either want somebody to cling to because we're afraid, or we're looking for a distraction from ourselves. We're looking to save somebody else. We're looking to not be alone. So many of us are very fearful of being alone, and so we want somebody to share that experience with. I can promise you that the foundation of rebuilding your life will never be a romantic partnership. That's not real. That doesn't exist. I know that romantic comedies continue to tell us that the secret to success in every part of life is just finding the right partner, but that is absolute crap. Okay, next level of the hierarchy. Very foundational health issues. Having physiological stability. We may have some major medical conditions or even a disease. We may be living with major mental health issues. But the beginning of any type of stability, any type of life transformation is making sure that we're doing everything that we can to attend to our most basic needs, because that type of stability is a big part of what allows us to build new connections and foster healthy relationships. The next piece is very simple, but very hard to do. The next, for my way of thinking, the next piece is having integrity and accountability. I always think of my friend Artis, who is one of the very best addictions counselors I've ever known, and she would routinely say to people, if you don't have responsibility and accountability, whatever you're trying to build is going to fall apart. Those are two of the most basic and vital aspects of any form of recovery, and without them, really very, very little is possible. A person who is not fulfilling their major life responsibilities or managing their health is obviously not a person who is capable of maintaining a healthy relationship. So the next piece is pretty huge. It is relating to self. The key to any sustainable or loving relationship is relating to ourselves in a healthy manner. I can't be my own worst enemy and try to love others. And I have a lot of responsibilities to myself. But I think too often we minimize our own value, our own importance. We minimize the vitality of having our needs met, acknowledging our own conflicts internally, our feelings, and having a whole lot of support. When I think about the downfall of a lot of partnerships that I've seen, it's oftentimes because two people are trying to be each other's world. They don't have outside support. They don't have friends or sponsors or people that they call on. And I'll always ask them to consider, okay, so you have this amazing person in your life and they're the sole source of your support. So what happens when you guys fight or when there's a problem? Like, who do you go to then? Having a support system obviously is vital to any form of recovery, and nurturing outside friendships is oftentimes a trigger for insecurities or jealousy. When a person is not secure in themselves, they easily feel threatened by the interest that we take in others. There's an old adage in AA that getting into a relationship is like pouring Miracle Grow on your character defects, and I've always appreciated that. Okay, so a few things to consider before you get into a new relationship. I think honestly, take stock and ask yourself, what do I bring to a potential partner? What are the pros and cons that I could reasonably see about myself as a partner? Am I ready? Ideally, that's something that we have a lot of outside input on. A lot of folks are frustrated because they're given the suggestion that they ought to wait until they're a year into their recovery before starting a new partnership. I think that's very simple. The excitement of infatuation or the distraction of having someone to use as a way to avoid ourselves is extraordinarily appealing to us. I think quite often we make the mistake of trying to make up for lost time. So it's interesting and amusing to me that the more fucked up a person is, the more likely they are to tell me their chronological age, and they'll say, I need to make up for lost time, I need to get my life together, I need to do all these things in a hurry. And I'll say, well, okay, I'm glad that you're motivated, I'm glad you want to make change. But getting into a new healthy partnership while you're still trying to make some foundational changes in yourself just doesn't make sense to me. Quite often folks are distraught or distressed at the idea that maybe they'd have to go a year of their life without having sex. And I'm quick to point out that's not really what this is about. Sex is a basic human need. Maslow actually puts it very low on the hierarchy, which is surprising to most folks. I think what's hard is just being honest about your motives and what it is that you're looking for. I don't want to judge a person for having casual sex. I would say that if that's what you want, that's fine. But don't, first of all, don't 13th step. Don't prey on somebody else's vulnerability. And don't allow a person to, don't mislead them into thinking that you're seeking a relationship if all you're really seeking is sex. There's a formula that folks in recovery talk about sometimes. It's called friendship, courtship, relationship. And I love everything about that expression. I think it is realistically the very best way to develop a partnership. Take an interest in a person, and in the worst case scenario, you've made a new friend. Now, if that turns into something more, great. But in the context of changing our lives and maintaining a strong recovery program, can you ever have too many friends? Not if they're genuine people, not if they're folks who support you. I think we tend to approach new partnerships the way that a person who's just crawled across the desert approaches a jug of water. We tend to drain each other. We take from each other, and we too often just fall into familiar patterns of behavior and get pretty predictable results. Okay, next level of things that I recommend. Basic relationship skills, being able to communicate effectively, being able to resolve conflicts, demonstrating kindness, appreciation for our partner, demonstrating gratitude, and being able to give and receive compliments, it's amazing to me how hard those typically are for folks in early recovery. I think we need to be open to outside input, and if someone is being genuine and telling you things about yourself that they appreciate, that may be uncomfortable to receive, but I view it as a responsibility, and I view it as being open-minded. If I'm going to have a healthy partnership, then I need to honor my partner's truth, even if that doesn't fit within my comfort zone. Doesn't mean I have to agree with them, but I have to not deflect the praise or recognition or the appreciation that's offered to me. And perhaps I can be open to the idea that that is their truth, that is their opinion, and I can let them have that. I oftentimes will focus on pragmatic support that we offer to each other in terms of fulfilling our life responsibilities, whether that's parenting or employment or education. Certainly ensuring that your partner is supportive of your recovery process and your ongoing healing. In terms of skills base, oftentimes I encourage folks to read up on the Fighting Fair curriculum. A lot of good programs that you can just Google it. Fighting Fair teaches us how to have conflict without going to extremes, without saying things to your partner like you always or you never. Teaches us to stay in the moment and not dredge up the past every time we have an argument. Being able to say things very simply and directly. Things like, I feel, I want, I need. Oftentimes when people are uncomfortable, they tend to tell a long story and they hint and allude at things instead of just coming right out and asking for what they want. I think as we develop some more skills and greater comfort with ourselves, we start tolerating more vulnerability. We're more open. Vulnerability is the key ingredient to intimacy, which is something that we all want, but oftentimes are very fearful of. So those, to me, are the most basic relationship skills that we need. If we go the next step up to intermediate relationship skills, I think of that as active listening, demonstrating empathy, having the ability and the willingness to take our partner's perspective, kind of seeing the world through their eyes. I think about it in terms of offering emotional support given to our partner in terms of their individual goals, not just our goals as a couple. I want to help folks look at mutual fulfillment of needs. So how do we both get what we need? How do we both win? Too often we're locked into a competitive mindset that we've learned in our family of origin, which is that we have to sacrifice to ensure our partner gets their needs met. Or the idea that only one of us can be right, only one of us can win. A little bit at a time, we're learning how to pour into each other's cup, and ideally we place no one before our partner. Children, as the notable exception to that rule. Kids always come first, but ideally all of the relationships in your life are secondary to your higher power, your sobriety, your program, and then only in terms of how you relate to other people, only children come before your partner. Advanced relationship skills, I think, are mostly ideals. They're not things that we actually master. Egalitarianism is a good example of an advanced way of relating. Egalitarianism goes beyond the idea that we ought to be equal in how we relate to each other, and frames it as how do we actually pursue that and achieve that. We should be looking for a strong flow of reciprocity. We should have a lot of give and take in our relationship. We should be able to fairly easily compromise, and we should be able to honor each other's individual pursuits. It's important to have time with friends. It's important to have time as a couple, and to have interests and hobbies that we pursue outside of our partnerships. So I'm going to pause and just check for questions. I would love to hear from you what your experience is. What kind of things do you want to check in about? Looks like folks are quiet today, so I'm going to answer a couple of questions that folks mailed in ahead of time. Question from some folks at the Therapist Toolbox. Forgive me, I don't know how to pronounce Maida? How do you support a client in recovery who is in a relationship with someone who is using and not in recovery? My client continues to relapse. Wow. Okay. First things first. I go back to safety. If you're in recovery from addiction and you're partnering with somebody who's in active addiction, obviously this is a recipe for disaster. So much that I can say about this, but I think the most important piece is there's a pretty good chance that you're co-signing each other's bullshit. There's a pretty good chance that you still have some reservations, or you may not be fully committed to your own recovery. And so being with someone who continues to use allows you to have a case of what folks in recovery usually call the fuck-its. One of the things that I teach people about relapse prevention is don't ever say fuck it, say fuck me. Because whatever decision or choice you make after saying fuck it is something that's obviously going to have negative consequences for you. And it's a little bit counterintuitive, but I realized early on that whenever a person in recovery is talking about it, they're talking about self. So if they're saying, I don't get it, it's not worth it, fuck it, those are all statements about self, and they are all a rejection of self. Ideally, we put nothing ahead of our recovery, because if we do that, then we're going to lose absolutely everything. Anybody who's worked in addiction recovery for more than a short time has heard the standard formula that folks usually have about rebuilding their life. I'd love to have $1 for every time somebody has said to me, well, Jim, I got to get a job, I got to get a place to live, I got to get my license back, and I got to get a car. And I'll say, okay, and what else? And they're like, well, if I can get all that, then I'd really like to be seeing somebody. And I'll say, okay, so if you achieve all of that, but you don't work a program, or you don't have a lot of accountability for making positive changes in your life, I believe that you will achieve and attain all of those things, and then you will lose all of those things. Sustainability, manageability, stability, these are not sexy concepts. They're just really necessary. They're really foundational and vital. And when we have those things, what becomes possible in our life does become progressively exciting, and we can have wonderful relationships. But in recovery, and this is, I think, something that people rarely talk about. In recovery, we tend to often develop toxic relationships. A toxic relationship is one in which there's just been too much pain. There's just been too much investment, and we're just hurting each other. But there's this mindset where you feel like you've invested so much that you're not going to just walk away. You've invested a lot of time and energy, and you've given to this person, and you want to believe that they're going to get it together. You want to believe that ultimately you're going to live happily ever after. And unfortunately, once a relationship becomes toxic, it never comes back. It never transforms into something that's good. You see this a lot in recovery. People get together, break up 27 times, get back together 26 times. We tend to do things in a rush. We tend to jump into bed very quickly. We tend to move in together very quickly. We tend to, we're in a hurry. We're trying to make up for lost time. But to get back to your original question, how would I support someone in recovery who's in a relationship with somebody who's in active use? I would say to them, I'm concerned for your safety. I'm concerned for your program. And I've never seen this end well. So I'm going to encourage you to protect yourself, to distance yourself. I'm not saying to you that you should end the relationship. I am saying that it's like setting boundaries. The whole point of boundaries is to protect yourself. But what I've learned about people like me is that we don't protect what we don't value. Don't co-sign on anybody's bullshit. Put on your own oxygen mask first, and take as much time and as much space as you need, because ultimately being with someone who's in active use while you're in recovery is only going to drag you down and will most often result in relapse. And that's before we even talk about enabling. Enabling, I think the hardest thing about it is that it always feels like the right thing to do for somebody that I love. But if you have any understanding of addiction at all, then you know that enabling someone is helping them to die, which is the least loving thing you can do. I really appreciated Lisa Williams wrote in and said that folks in recovery often struggle in their relationships with themselves. So it is no wonder that other relationships can be a struggle. In my experience, they are often aware of what might help, like setting healthier boundaries or simply leaving the relationship. The trouble is valuing themselves enough for the follow-through. Having one or two people to honestly talk with about what they know helps create space, remove the block, and move towards honoring themselves and the truth. If you're in Greater Bangor, you would do very well to know Lisa Williams. She's one of the very best substance use disorder clinicians in the state. And she raises some excellent points. So again, we don't protect what we don't value, and we don't often enough seek support. So my friend Artis used to refer to reality checks. Reality checks are having people in your life that you can go to and just say, I'm going to tell you what's going on in my life. I'm going to tell you how I'm looking at it. And I need some really brutally honest feedback. Am I lying to myself? Is there something I'm missing here? And this is approximately 1,000,000 times more efficient than trying to figure something out on your own. I'm always going to have blind spots. I'm always going to have things that I don't want to see or I'm not able to see. So having people in my life who will tell me the truth in no uncertain terms is really vital to my success. And I'm fortunate to have a partner who does that very clearly in my business and in the work that I get to do clinically. Whenever anybody asks me about the success of my clinic, I just encourage them to look around and to notice that I've surrounded myself with strong women. And I value that greatly. And what I most appreciate about strong women is that they say things very directly and in no uncertain terms. I like having strong women around me because they say things like, you're wrong. And I need to hear that. In the absence of people who challenge me, I will continue to repeat patterns or continue to make mistakes unwittingly. So I think to value ourselves sufficiently to function in a healthy relationship is no small thing. I think if your experience is anything like mine, I needed people to teach me about me. My recovery process in terms of my mental health and overcoming trauma was a lot of unlearning. Realizing that a lot of what I was taught and raised to believe in my family of origin was not true, was not adaptive for me, and made my life very limited and very hard. So allowing people to appreciate me, to give me insights about what they saw in me, allowing people to build me up and befriend me, is what increased my value. It's not something that we think our way into. It's not something like you read the right book or just suddenly discover that who you are. We are people who need people. And so if you're going to get to know your real value, that's a fantastic investment, because it will lead to things like self-preservation. It will lead to things like caring for your own needs and getting past the feeling that that's a selfish thing to do. It's not. Taking care of ourselves is not selfish. It is simply necessary. But it is not what's normative for us, at least not in early recovery. We're typically avoidant of ourselves, and we, at the cost of avoiding self, is not having an awareness of internal conflicts or emotions or unmet needs. So just kind of a crash course there in what it takes to have a healthy partnership. I plan on doing some more talks in the future about healthy friendships, about maybe healthy parenting, and other topics, other questions that you have. Please get in touch with me. Let me know what those are. Jim@sobernow.com is the easiest way to reach me. Connect with me on Facebook, Jim LaPierre. If you haven't already, please check out our Facebook page for Sober Now and give that a like. Please check out our YouTube channel, which is also Sober Now. There's 90 videos there on different topics of recovery and things that folks tend to experience in the course of recovery, and those are completely free. If you subscribe to that channel, you'll get notified. We typically add at least one video a week. I'll be back this coming Thursday about noontime, and we'll talk about some more stuff. In the meantime, please take excellent care of you. These are very trying times, and your self-care is more important than ever. Take care.